Namaste. Welcome. Thank you for joining me today for another asana a day. Today we're going to work on Parivṛtta Trikonāsana. Parivṛtta means revolved or turned around. Basically, it's a twist. And Trikonāsana is the triangle pose, so this is the revolved triangle pose. However, if this is your first time doing this pose, you're fairly new to it, I highly recommend you check out the video that I did on parsvottanasana, and I'm going to link that here. So go to that, work with that pose for some time. Lays a really good foundation for Parivṛtta Trikonāsana in terms of getting the legs, ankles, feet, legs, hips ready to move into this pose that's more deep and a little more challenging. So work with that one for a while, come back to this, or I'm going to try this out a little bit today and then go back and work with that one, and you'll see how much it really changes Parivṛtta Trikonāsana for you. So what we'll need today is really just one mat. I've got two because I'm going to do a couple different angles for you. A chair would be good, a wall space, 2 blocks if you have them. And if you don't have the blocks, you can actually really use the chair. And then as a modification for the blocks, and then later if you decide you want blocks, you can get some blocks or make some from things that you have around the house. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is a foundational aspect of the pose in terms of how we place our feet. How we place our feet is really important because it affects our hips and it affects the stability of the pose. It also affects the stability of our joints and the health of our sacroiliac joints. So I'm going to demonstrate this head on, and often you will hear the instruction that you step your foot back and line up the heel of the front foot with the arch of the back foot. So if I do that, that's kind of like what I like to say, standing on a tightrope, right? I've got my front foot on the tightrope, I've got my back foot on the tightrope. When I do that, the hips sockets, where the femur bone sits into the hip socket, acts like leverage or, leverage, kind of pulling my hip bones outward. And this unhinges the sacroiliac joint. That's the joint where your sacrum, your spine, and your hip bones meet. And we want stability in that joint, so we don't want to unhinge it. It does unhinge slightly to make your gait in walking very smooth and other movements. But in these standing poses, we want to cultivate stability and strength for the health of the joints and for the stability and strength of our body. So my recommendation then is to walk your feet out from the hip socket. That means this front foot is going to stay in line with its own hip socket, and this back foot in line with its hip socket. So if I come back up, and you saw me adjust my foot over, and I'll just do this on the other side, is when I step that foot back, I'm not going to step back onto a tightrope. I'm going to step straight out of my hip and turn the heel in slightly for it to land. And then I hope you're doing this with me. As you do this, notice how this feels in your back, right? Your back should feel fairly relaxed and free and open. When you stand on a tightrope, you might feel a sense of being condensed, a little pinched, a little stuck. But not everybody. So for example, if you have more narrow hips, that is not going to affect you as much as if you have wide hips. Typically it's men who have the more narrow pelvis and women have wider pelvises. Of course, everybody's a little bit different. So if you have wider hips or your hip sockets sit slightly different on your hip bones, this can make a big difference. So I just invite you to play with it, explore a little bit, consider this idea of not needing to stand on the tightrope and giving yourself a little space between your feet. Okay, so that's a foundation for the feet. And while I have you at this angle, I'm going to talk about the front foot. In the parsvottanasana, the pose that the video I was recommending before, and in this pose, and really in all of the standing poses, but particularly those three, or two or three, it's very common if we experience a lot of tightness in our hamstrings or our outer hip for people's foot to come up off the floor. Like we sort of shift our weight into the outer edge of the foot. So I'm going to just remind us right now to really focus on anchoring down through the inner heel and the ball of the big toe, and lengthen through that leg, reach that hip back, right? Without letting that foot supinate like that. So you're kind of reaching through the inner leg, inner foot as you stretch your hip back, right? And then I'm gonna just come back up and take a look at Tadasana. Again, feet hip width apart and the feet are parallel. And this is where a block will come in handy. If you don't have a block, you could use a book, or you could even use a ball, like a fairly firm ball. And I'm gonna place that in between the thighs, about mid-thigh, as I stand in my Tadasana. Now, this block has one width, and everybody's hip width is gonna be a little bit different. For some people, this might feel wide. For other people, it might feel not wide enough. But for just a moment, the idea is to get an understanding of how our muscles are going to be used later in the pose. So I'm lifting up my toes in order to anchor down through my heels. The ball of the foot is grounded, right? So I'm just checking in with that my alignment is over my ankles, most of my weight dropping into my heels, the ball of the foot grounded, the toes are free and light. Then with the block, I'm going to just move into the block with my inner thighs. Squeeze the block. So as if somebody was going to come along and take that block away from you, don't let them take it. You're going to kind of grab into that block. Rooting the heels down, squeezing into the block. And you might notice that you feel a little taller as you do this. These are very engaged, dynamic Tadasana legs. Later on in the pose, we're going to explore this usage of the thighs, the muscles of the legs, but you're not going to be able to use the block, so you're just going to have to transfer this proprioception, this kinesthetic awareness into that pose. Good. So let's take the block out, and we'll set that aside for now. And I want to look at, because I said this pose is a twist, I want to look at getting that twist moving in a very healthy way. So we're going to use the wall for this. So I'm going to move my sticky mat to the wall. I do recommend you do this with a sticky mat because your feet could slide, and that's not what we want. We really want to be stable and anchored. So I'm finding a wall that I can put my hands on, and I'm actually choosing a wall as opposed to a countertop right now because I'm going to push into the wall. So that would be one time where I'm going to say use a wall instead of a countertop, just for this little experiment. I'm standing fairly close to the wall so that you can see my elbows are a little bent. And then I'm going to step one foot, and so right now for me, I'm going to step my left foot back. My right foot is my forward foot, if you're following my right-left instructions. Turning that back heel in a little bit to let it land, and anchoring through the back leg. Now, I'm going to pause for just a moment because if you watched that last video that I was recommending, you got the instruction on if that back ankle is tight. However, if that back ankle is not reaching down into the floor, and you haven't seen that video, I'm rolling up a little sticky mat here. This could be a blanket or a towel, so that when I step back, my heel doesn't have to go all the way to the floor. Right? So that gives me a little bit of playroom if I have a lot of tightness in that calf muscle back there, right? And so you can see that as I stepped back, now my arms are straight. So get that distance for yourself so that you can be at the wall, step one foot back, and your arms are straight. If your calf muscle is fairly stretched out, and your heel goes to the floor, you don't need this. This is just a reminder that if you're standing here with your heel floating in space, or it's like really intense in your calf, put a support under there. It gives you grounding. It lets you be, have the experience of being connected to the floor. Okay, so left foot back, right foot forward. This puts me into a bit of a forward bend, and for many people, this can already feel like quite a bit of a stretch. This is a good one, and this is basically parsvottanasana with the support of a wall. We're going to turn it into Parivṛtta Trikonāsana by pretending that I'm pushing this hand into the wall, and I'm going to pretend with my right hand that I'm grabbing a band or a rope or something, and I'm pulling it back away from the wall and then forward, right? So let's just do that a couple times. Your left hand pushes into the wall, right hand pulls. This is if your right foot is your forward foot. Inhale, come back to the front. Exhale, pull. So notice, just keep doing this with me, that you're twisting, right? Your torso is twisting. So we get most of our twist from our rib cage, right? It's really set up to do a very deep twisting motion. Lumbar spine, not so much. We don't get as much there. So I want you to notice that ideally your hips are moving as you're doing this. Not a ton, but as I move into that twist, my left hip kind of goes towards the wall a little bit. Right? That's very healthy movement for a twist, right? That keeps your lumbar spine healthy and happy because it doesn't get a lot of rotation. And so that if you let the pelvis go a little bit, it allows that lumbar spine to move with the thoracic spine. I'm going to come up now, and we'll do the other side. So we're going to step the right foot back. Remember, you're stepping right out of your hip socket. You're not stepping onto a tightrope. You should step back far enough, or you have your distance from the wall, that you can have straight arms and kind of push into the wall a little bit. So this time, if your left foot is forward, you're pushing the wall with your right hand. Use your left hand to pull an imaginary, let's say like a bowstring, like I have a bow, and I'm going to pull that bow back. The right hand is pressing into the wall. And let's just do a few repetitions. This movement is lovely for the spine. And I like to coordinate it with my breath. So I'm breathing in as I turn to the wall, breathing out as I twist. And from this angle, with me turning away from the camera, you may really be able to see that movement in my hips where as I twist, my right hip goes forward a little bit, right? And then it comes back to neutral as I turn back to the front. Good. Just a few more with breathing. Good. And then bend your front knee, lift your back heel up, push down through that front heel to step back up. And we're going to come back to our mat here. I guess I actually don't really need that. I need this. Good. So we're going to use a chair. Now, this is where you could potentially be at your countertop somewhere in the kitchen or wherever you might have a countertop. This is a little bit of a low countertop. It could be here, where you could stand at the countertop and put your hands on the countertop. I'm just using this to demonstrate. And we'll step the right foot back, right out of its own hip, not onto a tightrope. Support your back heel if you need to. And so whether you're on a roll of some kind or on the floor, reach that heel down into the floor. Really root straight down. Keep this back thigh pressing back. Check out your front foot. Press down through the inner heel and the ball of the big toe. straight leg. Okay, this is a triangle pose, Trikonāsana, so the legs are straight. If the knees are bent, you don't have a triangle anymore. Right? So dynamic through your legs, reaching out from the hips into the earth. Push the floor away, and then with hands a little higher than the deeper aspect of the pose, like on a countertop, but lower than being at a wall, you can go again, right? So if your left foot is forward, you're pulling your left hand back as your right hip kind of drops forward a bit, letting your entire spine turn. And if you want to extend that left arm out, you can. Okay, let's come up, push through that front heel, bring your right foot up, and switch sides. We're going to step the left foot back. Make sure you've got distance, hip distance between your feet. Your back should feel, your lower back, your sacrum should feel pretty happy. Pressing the feet out of the hips, the legs out of the hips, into the feet, into the earth. Make sure you're not sickling out onto that outer edge of your front foot. Make sure your back heel is rooting down. The legs are strong and powerful. And we're going to turn. So I'm bringing my right hand back into this twist, right? So you could bring the hand back like this. You could extend it out and come back. So this is like a really quick, I like to show this one where the hands are kind of high. Because if you're, say you're cooking in your kitchen or something, you can just take a little break and kind of rejuvenate your legs and energize them and get a twist in your spine or just a stretch in your hips and legs. I'm going to flip the chair around now, sorry for the squeak, to demonstrate how we will go lower in the pose. So I'm going to step the right foot back, anchoring the feet into the earth strongly, dynamically, powerful legs. And coming forward, now I'm going quite a bit lower as I reach for the seat of the chair. Now, we're going to be doing the same thing where we draw that left arm back, which takes us into a twist, but I want to talk about the legs. Remember we did that Tadasana pose where we were squeezing the block between our thighs. We're going to use that here to begin to wean ourselves off of the chair, because not that we don't take our hands off of our block or the floor. They're going to be connected to something, but the arms are not doing a lot of weight bearing. And in the beginning, because this pose really challenges our stability, people tend to put a lot of weight in their arms. So this is just a way to help you learn how to use the legs better and get out of the hands so much. So you're going to pretend like you're squeezing the inner thighs into that block, which obviously you can't use a block here because the legs are apart, but you're going to activate through the inner thighs as you press down into the floor, draw into the midline through the inner thighs, and then twist. And then with an in-breath, we'll come back. Bend your front knee, lift your back heel, push through that front heel to come back up, and we'll switch sides. So I'm stretching that left foot back, nice step. And I didn't talk about the width of this, the length of the step. If, we did talk about putting a roll underneath your back heel, but you can also take a shorter step to get your heel down and feel grounded, right? It's just going to be a little less deep of a pose, which is fine. And over time, you can begin to take it a bigger step. If you take too big of a step, that back heel is not going to go down. You're also not going to feel very grounded and stable. You're going to feel really wobbly. Okay? So press from your hips out into your feet, strong, dynamic legs. Squeeze the inner thighs into the midline. Draw your right hand back if your right leg is forward. And then you can extend the arm for Parivṛtta, Trikonāsana. And then we'll come back, bend your front knee, lift your back heel, push through the front heel and come up. I'm going to move the chair out of the way and take blocks. So going to do this one last time. So this is our last Parivṛtta Trikonāsana. And you're going to bring the blocks. And as I said, if you don't have blocks, you can just do the variation we did on the chair. You could find things around your house that could take place of a block, or you could get yourself some yoga blocks. They're very useful. And I'm bringing them pretty close to the outside edges of my feet. I'm going to step the right foot back, turn the heel in, anchor that back leg down. Strong legs. I'm pressing from the hips through the legs into the earth. My back thigh is pressing back. My front inner foot is anchored into the floor. I'm kind of pushing the floor with the ball of my big toe and the inner heel. You could even try lifting up your toes and then put the big toe down. That'll really wake up that action. And then I'm going to come forward. So this is parsvottanasana. That's the pose, parsvottanasana, from the last video. This is your foundation here. And then I'm going with the left foot forward, keep the right hand on the block, left hand on my hip, and twist. So I'm hopping my back foot up a little bit because I feel like I'm losing my grounding. So I shorten my step. And as I twist, you can see my right hip dropping down a little bit to facilitate the lumbar spine participating in this twist. Most of the twist comes from your thoracic spine. And that top arm can go up unless your shoulder doesn't like it. Just keep your hand on your hip. We're squeezing the inner thighs into the midline so that all your weight isn't dropping like into that right hand, that the legs are doing the work, this hand can be light. And then we'll come back to the front. And let's come up with the torso first. Bend the front knee and step back together. And just take a moment here in Tadasana to breathe and notice how this feels. This is one of my favorite poses because you get wrung out in such a lovely way. It's really nice to be wrung out like that. So let's step the left foot back, turning in that back heel to feel anchored. Don't take such a big step like what happened to me last time, as I had to adjust my step up because I took too big of a step to accommodate the twist. And I'm going to exhale and come forward. And strong dynamic legs, looking at that front foot, use that front foot well, use your back foot, your back leg well. Draw the inner thighs into the midline so your hands are on the blocks, but they are not bearing your weight. It's your legs that are bearing your weight. Then you can bring the right hand to the hip and twist. Parivṛtta, Trikonāsana. So just notice on your own body, in sensation, that as you twisted, I'm hoping that you feel that your pelvis is participating in this twist. It doesn't have to be a huge movement, but the left hip's dropping down a little bit as you turn to the right. And if it feels comfortable for your shoulder, you can bring that right arm up. And then we turn back to the floor. Push through the feet. Push the floor away as you breathe in and come up. And we'll step back together. So I said that's the last time we're going to do it. I'm going to have us do it one more time. Just so I can demonstrate maybe the next step in this for you. So let's step the right foot back, root down into the earth, from the hips, through the legs, through the heels, through the ball of the foot, into the earth. Exhale, come forward. Draw the inner thighs firmly into the midline. And there's a couple things you can do. As things start to loosen up in your legs, you can start to lower this block, right? And eventually, go to the floor. Don't be in a rush to go to the floor, working with the wall, the chair, the high blocks, until they almost seem like an impediment, right? For me, using the blocks keeps me a little bit too high and my back goes into extension. And in this twist, it's really, there's a little bit of, I don't want to quite say flexion of the spine, but the spine is, in order to twist, you don't want to go into extension of the spine. You want to kind of keep this more neutral spine spiraling around. Right? If I go into extension, I kind of take myself away from the twisting action. Now, the other thing I'm going to show you is that you will see this pose demonstrated with the hand on the outside of the foot. So you could potentially walk this block very close to your front ankle, and if your left foot is forward, your right hand can go on the block, and you can practice the pose that way. I really prefer to do the twisting over once I've developed the ability to, my hamstrings are long enough to let me go to the floor, and then cross over and maybe like add a block to help with that. Okay, so we're going to come up and just do the other side. So push the floor down with your feet, breathe in to bring yourself up, bend that front knee, and step back together. Notice how this feels. Whew, those hips are really getting stretched out and opened, and what I feel is just like energy just flows through the body when the hips are freed up like that. So let's step the left foot back, root down into the earth, strong, dynamic legs shooting like arrows out of the hips and into the earth. Check the position of your front foot. Are you using it well? Squeeze the inner thighs into the midline and let's come forward. If your right foot is forward, you're going to keep your left hand down as you twist. So over time, and by over time I mean weeks, months, years, these muscles start to release, right? Which started back in that other pose, parsvottanasana, and coming into practicing this pose over time, all of this starts to get worked out, including that calf muscle in the back. And so you begin to be able to go lower and lower. And eventually, maybe crossing that hand over. Squeeze those inner thighs into the midline to stabilize you. And then when you're ready to come back, turn back to face the floor first. Kind of, your pelvis went into this tipped position to help you twist. So realign, push into the earth with your feet, breathe in and come up, step back together, stand in Tadasana for a moment, and just enjoy the residue of Parivṛtta Trikonāsana. Hopefully it feels lovely. So this pose is what I would consider a little more advanced standing pose. Don't worry if it feels like you're really struggling with it. Go back to some of those other poses and then check back in with it every now and then, and hopefully you'll end up coming to love it as much as I do. So thanks for joining me. Namaste.